This year's Champions League final in Istanbul between Inter and Manchester City calls to mind another Istanbul final, the final played between Liverpool and Milan. That was back in 2005. Some call the 2005 final the greatest European Cup final ever. I was there, and so was my 11-year-old son, Samuel. Welcome to the Luke Alfred Show. I have 30 years of experience on the front lines of sports journalism, covering some of the biggest games in cricket, rugby, the FIFA World Cup, and even the Olympic Games. Come and join me as we learn about the greatest sports stories you've never heard. I'm Luke Alfred, and welcome to the show. Sometime in the first half of 2005, note the sly football metaphor in the first half of that sentence, I got it into my head that I wanted to go to that year's Champions League final. At that stage, I didn't know who was in the final, but I did know that the final was going to be in Istanbul, and Istanbul was where I wanted to be. So, with the pushiness completely out of kilter with my basic personality, I went about securing tickets. It wasn't difficult. I worked for the Sunday Times, a smug, self-important lot who were used to getting things their own way. There were some real advantages to working for the Sunday Times. You had only to say the words Sunday Times for people to fidget in their seats and doors to miraculously open. It was like saying the magic words in a fairy tale. Someone I hardly knew at Broadcaster Supersport knew someone who I knew even less. This someone I knew even less had 2 tickets for the final and, for reasons which seem frankly bizarre today, was prepared to part with them. Thank you once again to that man whose name I cannot now remember. Your kindness allowed me to attend one of the greatest Champions League finals ever played. In my mid-20s, my girlfriend and I had done what every self-respecting South African and Aussie youth of that age is meant to do, and hitchhiked around Europe. We camped on beaches in Turkey and had apricot and yogurt breakfast prepared for us by kind souls in Macedonia. We spent an eternity beside rail tracks in the middle of Yugoslavia while a replacement locomotive trundled down from Belgrade to replace the one we were stranded alongside. We discovered that we could actually use, get this, our credit card in Greece after they hadn't been accepted in Turkey. That's how long ago all of this was. We stayed in a youth hostel in Venice, so large that it might have been an army barracks. Our ill-secured tent rolled down the side of a hill in a Florentine campsite. We met Italian friends on the Ponte Vecchio and were taken home to steaming spaghetti dinners, which were eaten while drinking copious amounts of rough Italian wine out of little peasant glasses. We made love in moonlight on the walls of Lucca's old town, and we bickered about money, which made us feel so rotten and unworthy and guilty that we absolutely had to make love again. This was a sorry prelude, unfortunately, to arguing more about money. Sometimes we couldn't talk, we were so excited to be in Europe. We giggled like children instead. The further west you moved, the less our money was worth. By the time we got to France, we'd given up all hope of keeping to our budget. Luckily, we had just enough money for our fare on the ferry across the Channel, back to our London home. During our trawl around Europe in our 20s, we'd spent 5 nights at the Hotel München in Istanbul, a place which gave us no indication whatsoever of what tourist market they were hoping to corner. At first it was a novelty being German. We particularly enjoyed being approached by bold Turkish strangers asking us with lip-smacking audacity in heavily accented English, "Are you German?" My girlfriend could have passed for German. She was almost blonde and tanned and beautiful. Strange Turkish men loved her so much that, had I not been there, they would have married her on the spot. They were blithely unfazed when she told them that, no, she wasn't German. They proceeded to list every North European nationality they could think of, while she smiled her quiet smile and shook her head. When they got to Belgium, if they got to Belgium, their geography and courage usually faltered, and we were left to go on our way, muttering to ourselves that they would never, simply never, guess where we were really from. The novelty of being thought German wore off after a while, although it was balanced in a kind of neat harmony by the fact that we were not German. This afforded us a certain enigmatic and self-assured smugness, not to mention a carefree anonymity, when we did all the usual touristy things one does in Istanbul. We walked the Galata Bridge and dawdled in Taksim Square. We walked in the parks above the Bosphorus, where we ate lunch and read books and snoozed. We cracked open pistachio nuts and made little piles of husks while we drank Turkish beer. We waited for the cubes of lamb on our shish kebab to grill deliciously. We visited the Blue Mosque and Hagia Sophia, which left me so spellbound that I simply needed to kiss what every Turk for miles around thought was my German girlfriend. Suddenly an officious fellow scuttled out of the shadows. I hadn't noticed anyone was there. He wagged his finger. I just committed a terrible profanity. No kissing in a mosque. It was with these memories in mind that I announced a month or two before the 2005 Champions League final that we were all going to Istanbul. At first my wife wasn't overly enthusiastic. She still had memories of being German. I told her that was over 15 years ago. Turkey had changed and become more secular. The Turkish men were no longer sex pests, and we wouldn't be staying at the Hotel München. Besides, we were older. Turkish men would identify us for exactly what we were. What they'd say in heavily accented, broken English was, "Hey, we know what you are. You're middle-aged South Africans trying to recreate the splendors of your joyous youth." I, meanwhile, was so busy working to my bones at the Smug Sunday Times, so intent on getting to Istanbul, that I didn't know who, football speaking, had even got to Istanbul. It needed a colleague to tell me that AC Milan would be playing Liverpool in the final. Although it was theoretically a game between equals, it was really a done deal, said my colleague. Milan were a pre-Galactico team of Galacticos. Just look at the names. Kaká, Cafu, Andrea Pirlo, Clarence Seedorf, Gennaro Gattuso and Andrei Shevchenko. They even had Paolo Maldini, who, although getting slightly long in the tooth, was still as combative and astonishingly good-looking as ever. Who did Liverpool have? What did Liverpool have? They had pedigree, they had history, they had existential weight and meaning, but these were heady abstractions. Cometh the hour, and it would count for nothing. Liverpool were a team of makeweights. Think about it. Did the names Steve Finnan, Harry Kewell and Jimmy Traore keep Pirlo and Shevchenko up at night? I very much doubted it. Liverpool had a keeper no one was quite sure of. Shades of Bruce Grobbelaar, anyone? In Jersey Dudek, and would surely be outshone in the final by the bright lights on the Opel-branded shirts. Yes, they had Steven Gerrard, and yes, they had Milan Barros and Luis Garcia, but how could they score goals if they had no obvious player to score them? And was Rafa the checkbook Benitez, who often came across as a serial bumbler, really the equal of his opposite number? This was Rafa baggy suit Benitez's first season. Surely he couldn't just go out and win the damn competition. That would somehow offend the football universe's sense of proportion. Carlo Ancelotti, Benitez's opposite number, had played in and won, let me just add, European Cup finals under Arrigo Sacchi. It was surely going to be one-way traffic up the Bosphorus. There was one important difference between the German hitchhikers who had visited Istanbul in 1989 and the middle-aged South African couple who went to the Champions League final 16 years later. This time the middle-aged South African and his wife were with their firstborn son, the 11-year-old Samuel. With only 2 tickets for the final, it was duly decided that Sam would accompany his dad to the Ataturk Olympic Stadium on the city limits. We piled into a bus in the center of the city on the afternoon of the final and drove for an unimaginable length of time through parts of the city you don't see in the tourist brochures before being bundled out on a wasteland in front of the impressive but clearly recently built stadium. This doesn't really seem to give off the requisite Champions League vibe, I thought to myself, but I didn't want to appear too negative to young Sam. He was the envy of his grade. His mates were entering into the concluding phase of weeks-long negotiations with their parents at this very minute, begging them to be allowed to stay up and watch the game on television. In those days, the Champs League final was played on a Wednesday night, and the following day was a school day. Please, Ma, let me at least watch the first half. We, meanwhile, had dinky plastic wristbands attached to our wrists as we presented our tickets and walked through security. How cool was this? The fact that the wristbands were colored red didn't strike us as being an omen in any shape or form. It turned out that we had time to kill because we'd arrived early. This allowed us to watch pretty much an entire stadium worth of people arrive. There were suave Italian broadcasters in chicly tailored jackets and watches the size of bells you get on handlebars of old-fashioned bicycles. Jackets shimmered, teeth glistened, hair shone. The players came out to inspect the pitch, feeling it underfoot as though it might actually tell them something significant. Big matches are full of these moments, absolutely meaningless in their heady meaningfulness. And what meaning there was. This had already been going on for 6 months. Milan had beaten Inter, Man United and PSV as well as Barcelona in the group stage, while Liverpool went past Juventus and Chelsea. It was now or never. There was nowhere else to go. There were Liverpool supporters in matching red shirts. Milan were in white, we saw. We slowly began to notice that we were conspicuously underdressed. It's summertime in Europe, I'd announced with a casual waft of the hand in our hotel room when Sam's mother had suggested a hoodie or tracksuit top or something warm. The match hadn't even begun yet and Sam was cold. Finally, after all that meaningful waiting, the referee blew his whistle. Liverpool fans will remember the first half as a deepening nightmare. Milan's first goal was scored by Maldini, strange as that might sound, with less than a minute gone. Pirlo curled in a free kick on the Milan right, deep into the Liverpool half. But rather than zipping it into that awkward zone of no man's land between defenders and their goalkeepers, Pirlo snapped the ball well in front of the retreating line of Liverpool defenders. A late arriving Maldini didn't catch the ball cleanly. He was a defender after all, but his scuffed shot was hit well enough for it to bounce once before looping past Dudek's desperate glove and finding the net. He celebrated as if he didn't quite believe what was happening. Sam and I looked at each other. We weren't supporting Liverpool, but here was an occasion to support Milan, and we didn't cheer the goal either. Maybe it was time to stop sitting on the Turkish fence. As far as passages of play or incidents before Milan's second and third goals are concerned, I remember two. I remember Kuhl coming off because of injury early on in the half, and I remember how skittish the Liverpool defenders were every time that Shevchenko touched the ball. It was one of those things you don't pick up on television. Every time he ran at them down the Milan right, the Liverpool players hopped about like anxious birds, twitching uncontrollably. It was amazing to see firsthand. Shevchenko was so quick, so deadly. The Liverpool defenders looked capable of twisting themselves inside out by fear alone. It exerted a terrible fascination. Milan's second goal was even more deflating for the tens of thousands of red-shirted supporters. Again, Pirlo played his part, neatly passing the ball across the halfway line to Kaká, who was almost directly in front of him. At first it didn't look like a particularly dangerous pass. It looked everyday, almost innocuous, as though Pirlo was stretching out his hand in greeting on the threshold of Liverpool's house, saying hello and asking to be invited in. But suddenly, as Kaká stabbed the ball forward, possibilities emerged. Kaká, we all noticed, darted forward without a tracking back midfielder in sight. He was like a single purposeful pigeon in a deserted square, moving towards the only crumb. He ran menacingly at a retreating defense, always panic-stricken at the best of times, with Shevchenko to his right and Hernan Crespo, the Argentine striker, peeling away to his left. Kaká chose right and dinked a pass to Shevchenko, who gathered himself and crossed the ball slightly behind an advancing Crespo. It was awkward for Crespo because he needed to break his run, but he managed to curl his leg around the ball to score. I looked at Sam. He looked at me. I realized he was getting cold. Crespo was again on hand to score Milan's third. Kaká's sublime through ball beat outstretched legs, and Crespo one-touched the ball with the outside of his right foot past the outward rushing Dudek in the Liverpool goal. It was a goal of stunningly cruel deftness, a knife to the Liverpool heart. With it you could feel the red half of the stadium fall silent. At half-time I turned to Sam and asked him if we should go. It was 3-0 to Milan. Nothing could stop them now. My colleague back in the Joburg office had been uncannily spot on. We discussed the possibility but realized there wouldn't be any buses back into town. We endeavored to make the best of it. The temperature was dropping, and we were hungry. My performance on the stand so far hadn't been out of the top drawer, I'll admit. As a father, I was more like leaky Liverpool than masterful Milan. I had brushed away suggestions that we should bring along something warm. My anxiety that we wouldn't get to the stadium on time meant that we'd arrived ridiculously early. I couldn't even make a firm stand on who we were supporting. What an utter wuss. Parenting is full of such pitiful moments, moments where fatherhood in all its noble glory seems awfully far away. I can't truthfully say I endeavored to do better. What half-time substitutes could I bring on, after all? This was me. There was no one on the bench. All I did was worry that the final was already over and that Sam was way past his bedtime. If all this weren't bad enough, I now equivocated on the cusp of the food tent. Sam was hungry. So was I. Our VIP passes allowed us to pile our plates as high as the pyramids, but I felt underdressed and conspicuous amidst all the dash and glamour. Let's stay where we are, I said, feeling bad but not feeling bad enough to change my mind. Eventually, the voices in my head overpowered me, although maybe Sam's quiet insistence ran through me like a Kaká through ball. Whichever it was, we made our way to a stupendous buffet where absolutely nobody noticed us because they were all too busy tucking into the stupendous buffet. We scoffed something as inconspicuously as scoffing something aloud. It was good to feel a little less hungry. What would the second half on the outskirts of Istanbul bring? Liverpool's comeback was started by a smart Gerrard header, as he hung in the air to pop across from John Arne Riise into the corner of Dida's goal. Was this the start of something? Sam and I grinned. We began, ever so slightly, to fall on the Liverpool side of things. It got better. Vladimir Smisa, Kewell's substitute, rifled a long-range shot past Dida in the Milan goal, the ball having enough impetus to cross the line to make it 2 Liverpool goals to Milan's 3. Minutes later, and Gerrard's heel was clipped by Gattuso as Gerrard charged into the box like a wounded buffalo. Gattuso protested, but he was going through the motions. The penalty had already been awarded. The entire stadium knew that he was lying. Up stepped Xabi Alonso. Dida saved the Spaniards' penalty, but Alonso was alert enough to bury the save with a left-footed rebound that thundered into the top of the Milan net. Liverpool had scored 3 goals in 6 minutes. The score was 3-3. There were no thoughts of going back home early now. I hugged Sam. He hugged me back. We blinked once. We blinked again. We blinked some more. Could this really be happening? Really? The sides slugged it out like punch-drunk heavyweight boxers. And without even realizing extra time was up, penalties arrived. I felt for the first time in the final that I was getting the hang of being a father. Penalties are never fair because they're subject to the worst form of reduction. The way it usually works is that those who score are lauded and those who miss are forgotten. There is, however, an important caveat. The player who either misses or has his penalty saved when there are no more penalties left to either miss or save is singled out for particular opprobrium. In this case it was Shevchenko, the quicksilver striker who caused a ripple of fear in the Liverpool defenders every time he touched the ball. Looking back on the videos, it is interesting to see how Shevchenko betrayed signs of strain before his penalty. He fiddled with his hair. He fiddled with his ear. His approach to the ball was apologetic, unconvincing. He fired the ball straight at Dudek, and Dudek, who had made that miraculous double save in the second half, just had to palm the ball away to keep it out. It was all over. Liverpool had won the final. We were cold, but happy. Eventually, we begrudgingly became Liverpool fans. Back home in Johannesburg, it was late. Sam's mates had been allowed to watch the entire match. We head off to the waiting buses, joining the busy, jostling throng. The bus filled and we pulled off. But we were in for a rude awakening. We'd presumed the bus would take us back into town, where we'd boarded it that afternoon. This isn't what happened. Instead, we were dumped even deeper into the wasteland on the edge of the city, before a hastily erected tent with food and drink stalls lining the walls and sprung floors. Ah, so this is the after party, I thought to myself with rising panic. We could be here until morning, listening to house music, watching Liverpool fans puke. Belatedly, I got in touch with my inner father and looked for a taxi, knowing full well that this didn't look like a place taxi drivers frequented. I hugged Sam and told him to keep close, vaguely aware that I was more worried than he was. By some miracle, I noticed a taxi before long. Perhaps this was the lost taxi, I thought to myself. The lost taxi come in search of lost souls. I made sure to jump in front of that lost taxi. He didn't speak English. I didn't speak Turkish, but I somehow managed to indicate I would show him the way. We needed to get back to the center of Istanbul, to where our hotel was. My child was young. The night was old. Never have I been more thankful to that man. We got back into town ravenous. It was now well past midnight. My wife, bless her, managed to wake up someone in the hotel kitchen. They made us sandwiches. I drank a beer and rubbed my eyes and told Lisa about our adventure. Sam was already beginning to compose the stories he'd tell his classmates when he got back home. I was beginning to compose a few myself. In the days that followed, I filed a story or two on the final for my paper, grateful that some wise-ass news editor hadn't asked me for the definitive Steven Gerrard piece. We showed Sam the Istanbul we had once known. We told him, much to his surprise, that we had once been German. We crossed over to the Asian side of Istanbul to walk the streets and watch a film, Kingdom of Heaven, I seem to remember, with Orlando Bloom as the virtuous crusader. Only later did we realize that Istanbul was a fine place to watch a film about the eternal struggle between the East and the West. We took ferries and climbed the cobbled streets, taking infinite pleasure that in Istanbul you have sections reserved for certain trades. You have a coppersmith section, you have a hardware section, a section for this and a section for that. A day or two later we caught a ferry up the Bosphorus, as far as it could go. At the last stop we climbed a hill to a ruined castle and looked down on the entrance to the Black Sea. Sam climbed the walls of the castle. We looked down to the turquoise sea and noticed a school of dolphins moving like crescents through the water. So this, then, was the Black Sea. But our amazement was nothing, a mere drop in the ocean, compared to the Black Sea of disbelief Milan confronted in Istanbul that incredible May night. If you enjoyed this episode of The Luke Alfred Show, please like, share, follow, and subscribe. I write full scripts for the show in the form of long-form essays, and these are all available on my Substack. To get written episodes of The Luke Alfred Show a day early on Fridays, please check out the Luke Alfred Substack. You can hear The Luke Alfred Show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. I release a new episode every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. South African Standard Time.